Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. Can you all see me and hear me? See my slides? Okay, great. I am the project officer for ERIC, the Educational Resources Information Center, and the What Works Clearinghouse. And today I'm going to be talking to you about the What Works Clearinghouse and how you can use it to find evidence and evidence-based resources and what you might want to, and kind of how you can use this in your practice. So first of all, what is the What Works Clearinghouse? We are a federal website that you can find at whatworks.ed.gov. And what our program does is we are part of the Institute of Education Sciences, which is the independent research arm of the U.S. Department of Education. So we take existing research and we review it against a set of really rigorous standards to figure out if the claims that researchers make are validated by the research. So if a researcher says the study shows that a program is effective, we say, well, are the methods strong enough to support that claim? And when we adjust it based off of what we know is best practice in terms of methodology, are the findings still positive and statistically significant? And we take kind of our analysis and we summarize the findings for the public. And then we create these products that we're going to go to in a minute to help educators find evidence about what kind of programs and practices that it can use to help improve their teaching. So we're going to be just talking about when I say evidence, what do I mean? So we at the department really value evidence-based practice because you can use evidence to show people that your program worked, to justify funding and to support future funding. And we also encourage schools and districts to use policies and programs that are research-based, evidence-based, because if you're going to do something, you want to do something that works. And if you're making a decision between 2 or 3 different programs, you want to find ones that have been proven to work and to help students learn. You don't want to spend your time and your money on something that has been shown not to be effective. So the department has come up with these definitions of evidence and these 4 tiers of evidence. And I realize that this is confusing if you work in a school that uses an MTSS framework. So the tier names, I'm going to be referring to them by their friendly names of strong, moderate, promising, and demonstrates the rationale. And we use these badges on our website, and as I'm talking, you're going to see this to give users an indication of how strong evidence is. These are based in guidance that was related to the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA, which is what was formerly known as the No Child Left Behind Act or the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. So in our non-regulatory guidance of interpreting what did these mean, strong evidence is a well-designed and well-implemented experimental study. So this is normally a randomized control trial where just like what you see in medicine, where you have 2 groups of kids and they're randomly assigned to either get it or not. So I like to think about this as a lottery study. I am choosing who gets into the public pre-K program. 1 kid gets in, 1 kid does not. I'm picking the spots. In addition to there being an experiment, there has to be a positive effect on the outcome. We have to show that for it to be strong evidence, it has to work. It has to be statistically significant and positive. It can be a great, well-designed study and has no impact or has a negative impact. That is not evidence that the program works. Similarly, just because you find positive impacts for one test, let's say they did 5 tests, you can't say, well, the majority of them show no impact, but this one was positive, so therefore it gets positive effects. Generally, this program works. It does what it says it's supposed to do. It has positive findings. Lastly, well, second to last, is that it has to be a big study that you want to make sure that this is representative. So you have to have over 350 students across multiple sites to get strong evidence. And lastly, that when we think about evidence, we want to make sure that if you look at a study, that it was done in the same population setting as your school or your district. So if I am sitting in rural Kentucky and I'm looking at a study that is done in Baltimore, the population of students is vastly different and the setting is vastly different. There might be a lot of similar. So it might still be a good program that would be effective, but to apply something as strong evidence, it's really important to look at who was this program studied on and does it make sense for our context. So that's strong evidence, which is a really high bar. And an almost as high bar. Kind of when you think about this, I like to think about strong evidence as an A+ and moderate evidence as like an A-. So still an A, but not quite there. And this is a well-designed and well-implemented quasi-experimental study. So that means that you have a comparison group. It just wasn't necessarily assigned by chance. Or it was assigned by chance, and somehow the groups got contaminated, which would be like when I was doing my study of pre-K, where we picked half the kids to get it, half the kids not. And then I go to the school secretary's office to get the list. And some of those kids that weren't supposed to receive the intervention, their mom called and, pleaded, begged, showed their dedication to lobby to get their kids into this program, and magically made the school secretary was kind enough to find them a seat, which is great customer service. Totally understood why she did it. And as a parent, I would love it if the school secretary did it for me, but it's no longer the most high quality evidence. So it's considered, because that study was contaminated, it would be in this book of moderate evidence. Now, when you think about moderate evidence, the many programs and policies can't ethically be studied or easily be studied using an experimental way. So moderate evidence is still really good. And similarly, you have to have positive effect on the outcome, no overriding negative effects, has to be a large multi-site sample. And then you have to either match the population or the setting. So this could be a case where the students might not have be the same groups, might not have the same they may not look the same, but it was studied in a similar environment. The next two ones we're not going to focus on as much. And promising evidence is a well-designed and well-implemented correlational design with statistical controls for selection bias, which is just gibberish a fancy way of saying that you look at, did this program cause an impact out of this group of students? So let's say that there aren't two groups. You just look at a student and you say, was the impact higher before or after when we control for some other things? And demonstrates a rationale means that we have a logic model of why this program should work, and there is research or evaluation underway, but it is not done yet. And at the Clearinghouse, we very rarely will badge demonstrates a rationale because that's not really what we aim to do. We look at existing published research. So when we do this is what we're going to focus on for the most of today, is that we publish three main products. We publish practice guides, which are recommendations for educators on how to improve student outcomes. This is our biggest, most flagship product that I really think you all are going to enjoy. We also have intervention reports, which are summaries on one specific product where we go out intervention, which could be like a policy, it could be a program. Generally, it's something commercial that you buy. And we go out and we look at all the evidence on that one particular program and summarize it to say, does this program work across all the studies that we know exist? And lastly, we do reviews of individual studies. So both practice guides and intervention reports are based off of many studies. The reviews of each study that contributes to this product, as well as some that don't, are reviewed individually and are added to a database that can be looked at individually. Generally, I would say that as an educator, practice guides are going to be the best, most useful product, followed by occasionally an intervention report if you have the autonomy and the budget to implement an intervention. Generally, reviews of individual studies might be interesting, but in isolation, they are not as useful. They're generally more useful for researchers. So what is a practice guide? A practice guide is where we, the Clearinghouse, work with a group of panelists to come up with concrete, practical recommendations that educators can use in their classroom. Generally, these are things that will cost no additional money, which means no additional staff time, no additional outside resources. And it is designed, this is the practice guide we're going to be talking about the most today. This is providing reading interventions for students in grades 4 through 9. And so this guide was designed to be used by special educators, special educators, general educators, reading specialists, and coaches, administrators, and parents. So it has a broad audience. And so I say a panel. What do I mean by that? On your screen, you can see the panelists for this particular guide. And generally, our panels will have 7 panelists led by a panel chair. And the panel is responsible for developing the research-based recommendations and articulating how to implement the recommendations and addressing potential roadblocks for implementation. Our team of contractors will support them by actually doing the reviews and helping them, but it's the panelist who creates the recommendations and the content of the guide. And these panelists include researchers, current educators, pre-service and in-service development of educational personnel. So the people in teacher prep programs and master's programs. And a key thing here about current, these are people who are actively in the classroom working with students. So that we aim to get a panel that has on the ground knowledge, so it's not outdated. And lastly, we make sure our panel reflects the racial, ethnic, linguistic, geographic, and cultural diversity of public schools in the US. And so by that, I mean that the Clearinghouse has come under criticism in the past that our panel was very much reflective of the Excella corridor, and was not representative of the rest of the United States. And when you do that, you have biases because your impression of a school are the schools you've studied, the schools you sent your kids to, and the schools that you've attended. But when you look at the schools outside of, if you only look at a small geographic region, you're going to miss the way that other schools work, and you're going to miss all these great experiences and expertise that different panelists can work to bring in to make sure that this guide is truly representative and can be used by all educators. So that is what a typical panel looks like, and they meet about 5 to 6 times and have several small working groups. And these are like day-long meetings to really come together and produce these wonderful set of recommendations. And for each practice guide has a handful of recommendations, somewhere between about 4 to 7, and you can see the recommendations on the screen in a box for this particular reading guide. And what the recommendations have is that they have they're actionable recommendations that have a summary of the research evidence that supports the recommendation, and then a description about how recommended practice supports learning. And then we have specific guidance, potential obstacles, and tools and resources. And we're going to give examples for all of this in a minute. Okay. So for this guide, if you look here, this is the first recommendation: build students' decoding skills so that they can read complex multisyllabic words. Okay, what do we mean by that? So you see a practice guide, I like to think about it as a textbook. It is long. I think this one is 202 pages long. So this is not like pleasure reading. This is not something you're going to read at the beach. But I like to view it as a textbook where you read it chapter by chapter and really sit with it, work with it, practice implementing the recommendations, and then move on. So for this recommendation, you have the recommendation that it's in the blue box, that's the chapter heading. And then it has several pages. I think in this case, it's like 4 pages of explaining what is a research base, what does the research say about this, how does this work, what is that kind of context. Then we have specific how-to steps for educators to carry out the recommendation. That each, I think there's like 4 steps that say this is what you should do. This is specifically how you should do it. We have example scripts for the teachers to use to say, and this is a case of how to identify prefixes, suffixes, and vowel combinations. So it shows you exactly how these expert educators would be implementing this in their classroom. And sometimes having words to use is really helpful, so you're not starting from scratch. And then we have resources. And so in this case, this is giving examples of long vowel sounds like me, labor, polar. And why this particular box is helpful is we have found that not all educators, especially this is for middle schoolers, learned phonics, depending on when they came up and depending on what their background is. So when we talk about a long E sound, this will give them a quick thing, me, E. That's that sound we're looking for. Okay, and lastly, we have obstacles and advice. So these are actual challenges that these experts have encountered and that they've seen teachers that they have taught encounter, as well as their advice for overcoming them. And again, these are actual classroom educators who have decades of experience in the classroom, and they're going to bring this experience to light here. So these are hopefully tangible and actionable and helpful. Okay, so that is the guide. And that is just for each recommendation, we have all of that material plus really lengthy appendices with all sorts of details about the studies and what's contributing. And there's just a lot there. And we realize that these can be a bit overwhelming. So we work with our partner program, the Regional Educational Laboratories, or the RELs, to come up with supporting materials. And each of our 10 RELs are currently creating toolkits for practice guides, which are a series of really in-depth professional development tools that teachers and educators can use to kind of study the guide, really learn the guide, and put it into practice. These toolkits should be coming out in the next maybe year or two. So the toolkit for this guide is currently under development. So what I'm going to show you today is from our K-3 reading guide, which is our foundational skills for literacy. And this is not a toolkit, but it will show elements of the toolkit and what kind of resources you can expect in the future from us. So the first thing is a professional learning community. What we had heard from teachers that they have planning sessions where they're team meetings where they're talking about how can we learn, how can we kind of work together. And this is series of sessions. This is the facilitator's guide of you have this PD session, this professional learning community to use this guide. Week 1, session 1, you're going to do recommendation 1. Here are the resources that you need. There's an activity book, there's videos, there are session goals, there are specific things to discuss and work through. So here is a whole series of professional development that ready to go that teachers can implement in their schools, or they can do it self-study. We also have videos. I think this guide has something like 37 videos of actual teachers implementing these recommendations in their classrooms. So this is about 5 minutes long. There's real students, and you see some obstacles real time as these teachers are doing exactly what we are showing in the guide. These are really helpful to see how do you do this in practice? Am I missing something here? Are there better things I can do? So these are wonderful. What we then have for this guide is, so this is a guide for educators to support parents helping. So this came out in mid 2020 when many of us got the opportunity to teach our children to read at home unexpectedly. And what this was is this has tons of grade by grade, so kindergarten, first, second, and third page of videos and activities for parents to help implement these recommendations with their own children. And there's these videos, you can see one on the screen is showing parents, actual parents doing these reading activities with their children. These are not actors. It's really kind of helpful to see and helpful for educators to share with their parents of this is something you can do at home to kind of help those students who are struggling. There is also a teacher guide for supporting parents. So this is something for Family Literacy Night. There's printouts to send home. There's these activities. This is about a shopping list and kind of things that you can send home to really help build the family engagement and take what you're learning in the classroom and apply it at home. And all this is research-based. It's based off of the practice guide, but there are spin-off activities to just make it a lot more digestible. And lastly, this guide has a observation checklist of recommended instructional strategies for administrators to meet with the teachers about this is what we would expect to see if you're implementing this, and have this discussion, have a rubric. So again, not all guides have this. Many guides, they're coming, but these are really good, kind of fun, actionable tools to use. All right, so we've talked about practice guides. Now we're going to go on to that next product, which is our intervention reports. So intervention reports, so practice guides are typically on big topics like preparing young children for school, preparing kids for kindergarten, or preparing for reading in grades 4 through 9, reading K-3. What an intervention report is on is a single, oftentimes branded program. It's oftentimes something you can buy. So we go out and we look at all the research, and we see how many of them meet the standards, and of them, how many can we synthesize together. So for this intervention report, this was a big one. There were 87 studies identified that were eligible to review, and of them, 16 met the WC standards. So for this intervention report, this is kind of what the webpage looks like. This is how it's laid out. There were 39 studies reviewed, and 9 of them met our standards. So 9 of them we were strong enough methodological design that we felt comfortable synthesizing them and making kind of summarizing their findings. Again, these are rather big intervention reports. Oftentimes there's just 1 or 2 studies, maybe 3. So what you can see on this page is that you have the name of the program, where we studied it, and then a general summary. So this program, Read 180, was found to have a positive effects on comprehension and general literacy, potentially positive effects on reading fluency, and no discernible effects on alphabetics, which is our old term for phonics. You can see down here the findings by outcome domain, and over here is where you download the full report. And you can also see a summary of the student demographics in the studies that met standards. And if you click over here on this green button, we're going to show you this all again on the website. You can see our reviewed research. And this is for a different intervention report. But what you can see here, what I wanted to show is how many studies met standards and contributed to this recommendation. So for this report, there might have been 11 studies that contributed to the student behavior domain, but only 1 for school climate and 1 for math. So this is helpful to kind of understand that for these recommendations, how many of them met standards. And lastly, if you open up the PDF, which again, the PDF is here, you will get a whole bunch of information, and we're going to look at the PDFs more in a minute. But what I want to highlight here is you have a table of the resources needed to implement the intervention. So you know how expensive it is. And so this is $900 per participant, plus, that's moved on me, $900 per participant. So that is more than you may be having to spend. So this can be helpful for you to realize, oh, do you have the resources to implement this? Because there's some excellent interventions that have huge successes, but are just out of the price point of many schools. Okay, so this is something that we typically see are useful for people who are have a position to purchase or buy something, because these are often branded. Lastly, we're going to talk about individual studies, and I'm going to go through them quickly because generally we find that these are not as relevant to educators. And so what the review of individual studies has is it has the citation and a link to the study in Erin, which is our sister program, the type of study, how many students. Again, if we talk about the evidence tiers and how you need 350 students to get strong evidence, you can see here, this has 1,000, so it's more than 350. The grades band, you have this evidence tier that we talked about. And then you have, if you click on these findings here, so if here, this is review details. And if you click on findings, you can see that there are each outcome dimension. So this is cognition, this is interpersonal competencies, and you can see for each specific outcome, measure what the evidence here is. Was it positive? Was it statistically significant? You can see the sample characteristics of the study, and lastly, study details. Now, this is what is really helpful if you are trying to understand a study. Oftentimes, studies have methods that are, in Greek, Greek equations, really complex methodology sections. This is a great way of seeing if it's reviewed by the Clearinghouse and reading the study details to understand what they did. And then looking at the findings tab to know if it had a positive impact or not. That is kind of my little cheat sheet. Okay, so now what we're going to do is, now that I've given you an overview of what we have and what we're doing, I am going to give you my use case of example we're going to walk through on the website. So here's the example that I have. I am an 8th grade social studies teacher in Kentucky, and I'm looking to improve my students' understanding of primary documents. And why? Why did I choose this? Well, there is a Kentucky bill that is listed here, which has standards that say that students in 8th grade are supposed to analyze the impact of fundamental documents and speeches, and that this includes Federalist number 1 and Federalist 10 and 51. Now, I'm sitting here as background and context. My undergraduate degree is in American politics, and those Federalist papers are not easy reading. I would not put them at 8th grade reading level, and we'll get to that in a minute. But I would say my memory is I struggled reading those in college, and I was pretty good reader. Um, and so when I think about if I'm an 8th grade teacher, I would know that many of my students are not considered proficient readers on the nation's report card. Here's the most recent NAEP data. Okay, so they're going to need support to be able to read and understand these documents to help them meet that goal that is set forth for them. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a little field trip to the website, and all right, I am screen sharing, but it is here. Okay, so we are going to go to What Works Clearinghouse. Let me see if I can. There we go. Okay. So we're going to go to the What Works Clearinghouse website, and we're going to see what we can do. So the website here is whatworks.ed.gov, and it redirects this email address URL, which is not particularly user-friendly. So just know whatworks.ed.gov. And then I recommend always using the filters instead of the search. So I'm going to use literacy. All right. Well, first, let's go back to, I made the assumption that you all know what Federalist number 10 is. I think that many of you do, but if you haven't looked at it in a while, this is Federalist number 10. And what is interesting here is if you just look at it, you can see that it is like what you would expect for Constitution. It is a lot of heavy language. And when you do readability testing on this, I did this earlier because sometimes my computer gets cranky. You can see that this is, as I said, probably a collegiate level document. Again, this isn't perfect, but this is, it's collegiate level. Okay, so knowing that I'm trying to help students read this document, and this document is hard. It is actually, even though it's a social studies standard, to meet it, you need to work on literacy. So I am going to search for literacy, and I'm going to search for middle school, because the way we define middle school is 6-8. Now, I know that not every school does that. Some people consider 8th grade junior high. For me, where I grew up in rural New York, it was part of high school. But we consider 6-8 here. Now, I'm going to search for this. While it is loading, because my computer is cranky today, I want to say that the majority of our work is in math and literacy. We have stuff on other outcomes too. There's other categories there. But if you are a science or music teacher, it's important to think we aren't going to have a practice guide necessarily for you. So it's important to think about what are those skills and are they covered in a different practice guide. So I've known music teachers that have really loved our fractions practice guide to help students understand notes. That practice guide is great. For science, a lot of our math, because you need to understand algebra to be able to get through physics. So the algebra guide can be great. For our social studies teachers, typically the literacy guides are going to have a lot of what you need as well. So I do this search for literacy in 8th grade, middle school, and I see this practice guide. This is providing reading and interventions for grades 4 through 9. This is exactly the one that we've been talking through. And here you can see the 4 recommendations. And if we go to recommendation number 4, you can see that it talks about provide students with opportunities to practice making sense of stretch texts, i.e. challenging texts, which I think is an accurate description of the Federalist Papers that will expose them to more complex ideas and information. So this is a recommendation that directly ties to my work as a social studies teacher. So what I am going to do is I'm going to say, well, how do I find it? The way the website is set up is that we have these tabs here. So we have the details. That's not helpful. We have the panel, which is interesting, but not what we're looking at. And we have related resources, which is where you're going to find all of those documents, like what I had shown you before about the parent guide, the videos, all of those. This is a newer guide. The toolkit's under development. It's not ready yet. So we only have a webinar and a slide deck. But up here, this is what we're looking for. This is where you find your practice guide. So I'm going to click on full guide, and it's going to be a big document that's going to take forever to open. So I'm going to cheat. I had it up already. And I am going to scroll down here to recommendation number 4. And I'm going to click on it. So what this is going to show us is, let me make this a little bit bigger, is we have our recommendation here, which is what we discussed before. And then we have talking about what stretch text is, and it defines it, that these students are stretch text refers to reading selections that are challenging for students to read on their own, which means they're typically above students' independent reading levels. Okay, so this is really helpful. So this provides context. You look at this page and it gives concrete recommendations. Like the panel recommends working on stretch text 2 to 3 times a week for a period of 6 to 10 weeks. That may not fit your unit. If I'm a history teacher on the Federalist Papers, I probably am not going to be dedicating that much time to them. But it gives a sense of dosage that you should be doing this, but it should not be the only thing. And I probably have, knowing the other documents, quite a bit of stretch text to work through. This talks about the level of evidence, that it's moderate. It's based off a recommendation of 15 studies. And it gives links to the appendices that have the rationale for the level of evidence. So after this page of context, there are the specific how-to steps. And so it's talking about how to prepare for your lesson. And so I'm going through, and as I'm looking through this, so it says a lot of this recommendations are more for English teachers about finding interesting text. I, as an educator, in this specific example of a social studies teacher, I don't have that freedom. I have to teach this text, whether it's interesting to students or not. So I'm going to look at what is relevant to me. So before the lesson begins, read through the text and choose logical points to stop for group discussion. And then, so it talks a lot about stop points. Use a sticky note or marking note where to stop, and a citation to show why this is done by evidence. Jot a question that could be used as a discussion starter and a couple of follow-up questions when appropriate. Then create a list of difficult multisyllabic words, proper nouns, and essential words to discuss before and after. So it's talking about how to walk through your lesson to teach a stretch text. And so then it gives this example of this is a text to read on a Pulitzer Prize winner, and it has examples of where they would put the stop points. What are the proper nouns to go over ahead of time? What are the multisyllabic words to talk through ahead of time? And what are the essential words you need to know for understanding? And so this is a really good example that even though it's not directly applicable to what I'm teaching, I can see how to use this in my lesson. The next how-to step is provide significant support as a group works through the stretches together. So for me, what stood out is work through stretch text as a group with teacher support rather than assigning stretch text to students to work independently or with a partner. That is not how I was taught the Federalist Papers, and I think it is really helpful to talk about why. And so it goes through and talks about why you're doing this and how you're going to help and what ways that the panel, based off of research from multiple studies, I think we said 15 studies, have found to teach this difficult text. And again, very concrete. Write on the words identified on step 1 in the whiteboard or equivalent display. Provide a brief explanation, giving very concrete things to do. Then, as we saw on the PowerPoint, there is descriptive text of how I would narrate, giving me some script of what you should be doing, how you should be talking through this. This is really helpful to learn, to help teach, to help grow. Okay, more examples of scaffolding, giving really specific examples. And lastly, we have the obstacles. So this is, the stretch is just too frustrating. They tend to give up too easily. That is a real obstacle that I think is very relevant to this example and very concrete panel advice. Here's something about grade level science and history texts are typically many years above the instructional level for many intervention groups. Yep, exactly. This is exactly what is relevant to this. And here is concrete advice to do. It's talking about like looking at the graphics and charts and use selections of this. And these bits and pieces have a lot of things that you can pick out and put into your lessons over the course of a year, semester, however long you're teaching it, you know. Okay, so that is the practice guide. Next, what we have is let's see what else we have, because let's say I want more. Practice guide's great, I want more. So let's scroll down to see what we have for intervention reports. And I'm going to choose this one purposely, and it is the Knowledge is Power program. So we can look at this program that me as a social studies teacher who wants to increase literacy outcomes for my 8th graders. I see this has a positive effect for English language arts achievement. Awesome. And that's strong evidence. And it has a potentially positive effect on social studies achievement, which is great. I'm a social studies teacher. This is what I want. All is great. But when I look at what the program is, it's KIPP, which is a charter school program. So me as a teacher, I can't change my school to be a KIPP school. Me as principal may not be able to, and depending on what state you are in, I am not as familiar with your laws, but let's say I am sitting in Virginia, I don't have the power to have a charter school. So while this is interesting and relevant, it shows that KIPP has these positive impacts and potentially positive impacts. It's not all intervention reports can be implemented by everything. Now, all interventions are necessarily able to be implemented. So let's get to something that we may be able to do. Teach for America is another thing that you probably aren't going to be able to do, but Read 180 is, maybe, depending on who you are and your purchasing ability. And so this is a program that was found to have potentially positive effects on comprehension and general literacy achievement for adolescent readers. And so I can look at this. This is actually, we had looked at this earlier, and you can download the intervention report and get information about the cost, which is, this is 2017 data, so it's out of date, or it's 7 years old, so it's definitely going to be more than this. And I get a lot more information about the program description, the effectiveness, background, details, really concrete information on what this is and does it work. So these are intervention reports. Again, they're used generally at the district level or by admin, but there are things like growth mindset that might be applicable that are non-commercial. And lastly, let's choose an individual study, because we use these, we have a ton of intervention reports on literacy. That's kind of our big bread and butter of what we have been doing for many years. So then if we're going to do reviews of individual studies, let's choose this one. And this is a good example of a study, if it comes up, where it's not coming up for me. Okay, so what this is it's a program, it's of a study. It's not part of an intervention report, and it found strong evidence that it improved general literacy achievement outcomes, which is great. But the program itself is Houston Arts and Access Initiative, which is unique to Houston. It's not something that is necessarily replicable and that you can do in your district. So it's interesting and you could learn a lot, and there might be elements that you can pick and choose, but a study alone in isolation, it doesn't have that kind of concrete actionable steps that you would have with the practice guide, and it may not be applicable to your work. So last thing I want to show you is for the WWC on our homepage, which is whatworks.ed.gov, not what is here, we have a whole section of resources for educators. And I realize this page is a little bit laundry listy. We're working on it. We're in the middle of doing a complete website overhaul. But we have, if you look on our side, we have all of our practice guides listed here with all of our resources. So here is, if you're talking about assisting students reading with K-3, this is one of our older guides. There's one video, but if you look at our, where is it? Supporting students K-3 and foundational reading skills, here's where you can find all of the resources that I had mentioned before. And so this is where you can find information on the Teacher's Guide to Family Literacy, and that we had talked about. This is where you can find the link to supporting your child's reading at home, which I talked about. And where you can find tip sheets, the professional learning community. So the tip sheets here, if they'll load, are concrete specific tips that you can implement, print out, give to your teachers in your building about specific tips that you can do. And you also can find the link to the professional learning community, which would have all of the videos here. Now, and you can see this is on our sister program, the Regional Ed Labs website. So that is what we have on our website. I would love to take any questions that you have. Feel free to either put them in the chat or unmute, whichever is easiest for you. No questions? I'll give it a minute, but let me see. Give it a minute. If questions come up after the presentation, you can always feel free to reach me either whatworks@ed.gov. There's a contact us help desk, or you can email me directly. My contact information is here. It looks like there's no questions. So thank you guys so much. I've really enjoyed talking to you today. Oh, wait, there's a
Thank
question
you.
in the chat. Let me see, did that come in? Oh, thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. We appreciate it. All righty. I guess that's it for us. A short one today. Awesome. And I think,
I can put
Elizabeth,
the
do you have the
eval,
eval?
yeah, give me
You do?
one second. Yeah. Mhm.
Awesome.
I was waiting for all the thank yous because it would just been
Awesome.
Okay.
It's looking rainy here in Lexington. I hope it's not too rainy where you guys are at. Bye, guys.
I'm going to stop the recording.